Minh Thúy xin kính chào quý vị hôm nay thứ Sáu, 10 tháng 5, 2024. Đến với BATV hôm nay gồm có phỏng vấn đặc biệt và nhạc lá bồ đề. Kính thưa quý vị, phải chăng giới báo chí lúc nào cũng loan tin những tin tức đen tối và ảm đạm? Tại sao họ lại cố tình đăng tải những tin tức như thế? Tại sao Bộ Ngoại giao lại không thể loan báo những tin tức lạc quan về những thành tựu của miền Nam Việt Nam và của Mỹ vào thời gian đó? Phải chăng những thành tựu của Bộ Ngoại giao quá nhỏ nhoi hoặc là những nỗ lực của các nhân viên hoàn toàn thất bại? Minh Thúy mời quý vị theo dõi sự suy nghĩ và giải thích của ông Lacy Wright trong phần 7 phỏng vấn đặc biệt do Phan Lê Dũng, Võ Thành Nhân và Minh Thúy thực hiện.
Would you say that that's a part of the problem is because of the media are always reporting the dark side rather than the bright side?
Well, that's always true everywhere. There's probably some truth to that. Whether now, of course, the embassy had the task. One of its tasks was to publicize what we were doing, and present it in a good and truthful and positive way. So, how useful that seems to have been would be interesting to go back and see, but I presume you're still right that just as everywhere in the world, the press focuses unduly, I guess, on tragedy and problems and all that. That would have had some effect.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the foreign servicemen that was working with you in general? Do you think they've done the best they could, or if you were to go back and do it, would you have done it the other way around?
Can you be a little more precise about the question?
Or the effort, like you were working in court project, you're one of the personnel of the court project. If you have to go back and redo it, do you see any part that you've done wrong?
I'm sure there would be, but I don't think that should take away from what I think has happened, and that is that by and large, many of these programs worked. The land reform program worked. Roads were built. A banking system in the countryside was created. Of course, anytime you conduct a big program like this, you always go back and you say, well, I wish I had done that and I wish I had done this, but overall, I think they worked. And in fact, a lot of people say, William Colby was writing about this before his death. Mm-hmm. He would have said, and he did say, that by 1973 or so, the guerrilla war had been won in the South. That is because of all these programs, because of the very controversial Phung Wang program, which, whatever you think of its successes, mm-hmm. did have the effect of destroying a lot of the Viet Cong infrastructure in the South. Mm-hmm. So I think I can say that most of South Vietnam was pacified by then. You could drive around the countryside at night, all of that stuff. And in fact, presumably, that's what triggered in the North Vietnamese the decision, well, we've got to attack them militarily with our huge army. We're not going to win this war on the ground any other way.
Mm-hmm. So, how do you feel about the Paris Agreement? Does it somehow redirect the effort that you were doing at the time, or not really?
Well, everybody points to the, first of all, as you well know, the Paris Agreement was foisted upon President Thieu. And principally, I gather, because it failed to exclude North Vietnamese forces from South Vietnam. Now, some people would say, and have just said the other day, that don't forget that when the Paris peace agreements were being negotiated, mostly by Kissinger, he had to take what he could get, but it was built on a foundation that existed under President Nixon. Particularly Nixon's threat that if you don't do this, something very bad will happen, taking to the North Vietnamese side. If you don't respect the terms of this agreement, something really bad is going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, by the time it was put into effect, Nixon was gone. That was gone. And other negative things had happened in the Congress and so on. So, but clearly, the Paris peace agreements, as they were finalized and implemented, were very detrimental to South Vietnam.
So, if Nixon weren't gone, like a lot of people say, would you say that the Paris Agreement would have been a very successful agreement, or still not really?
Hard to tell, because Nixon, I think, would have wanted to carry through on his threat. Well, first of all, if Nixon were there, maybe the North Vietnamese would have been much more careful about what they did in violation of the peace agreement. If they had violated it, Nixon might have made good on his threat to them, or because other things had changed, he might have concluded that he couldn't keep, because he didn't have the support of the Congress and maybe other reasons. So it's hard to tell. It's all speculation.
Mm-hmm. All speculation, but what about the people in your organization? How do they actually view, how's your emotion when you see the Paris Agreement with all the Americans withdrawn from Vietnam?
Oh, terrible. And heartbreaking.
That's not only you, that's for everybody in the Foreign Service.
Oh yeah, awful, awful.
Did you feel like the South going to be on the losing side after the Paris Agreement? Do you think that South Vietnam will be wiped out?
No, I don't think. I certainly did not, and I don't think most people. Some might have, but I don't think so. In fact, I think as the Paris Peace Agreement was coming into effect, January 1st, 1973, I think there was a sense of optimism that the South Vietnamese were doing well for the reasons that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. But then things started to go south.
Is that just exclusively in the Foreign Service, or have you talking to other people in CIA organization or the military? They certainly didn't feel the way you do.
Maybe not, yeah. But I think there was a strain of thought, and I think that a very important CIA agent was a proponent of it, Bill Colby, that things were in a good situation at the beginning of 1973, and if that momentum could have been kept up, things would have turned out differently.
Would you agree with that?
If I were back at that time thinking about it, I think I would. Yeah.
Minh Thúy xin kính chào quý vị hôm nay thứ Sáu, 17 tháng 5, 2024. Đến với VATV hôm nay gồm có phỏng vấn đặc biệt và nhạc lá bồ đề. Kính thưa quý vị, toàn thế giới đã nhận định rằng Mỹ thất bại ở Việt Nam. Nhưng phải nhìn sự thất bại đó theo lăng kính nào để rút ra những kinh nghiệm và bài học đáng giá. Minh Thúy mời quý vị theo dõi sự suy nghĩ và giải thích của ông Lacy Wright đối với sự đánh giá toàn thể nỗ lực của miền Nam Việt Nam và nỗ lực của Mỹ trong phần 8 phỏng vấn đặc biệt do Phan Lê Dũng, Võ Thành Nhân và Minh Thúy thực hiện.
But now looking back at all of the American involvement in Vietnam, what's your judgment on it? With your time invested and with all the projects going on and with all the things that the American has been doing, was it worth it?
Well, we failed. It was worth doing, but we failed. We can't get away from that. Now, there's another question. I don't think that's the end of it, just to say we failed. I think it's, and this is being done a lot now, as you know. People are looking back now. Historians are looking back at South Vietnam and asking the question, what were its failures and successes? And I think that's a very useful thing to be doing. I think there's some real material there that ought to be more widely known and brought to light. There's the land reform program, which is due to President Thieu, and which was never reversed. The communists tried to reverse it and could not. There were the infrastructure that we left there. That's good for people. Let's leave the government out of it for a second. That's good for people. Electrification, schools, all of this stuff is now benefiting people. Unfortunately, it's distorted a bit by the way that the current government is using it in some instances, but still, it's there. It's something that the government did, and more deeply, I think it gave people, the people of South Vietnam, at least those who were paying attention to this kind of thing, an alternative to the communist rule, a different way of looking at things. Now, to what degree this is operative now in South Vietnam, that's a very good question. The communists, of course, have tried to undo that kind of thinking. They try in every way they can to rewrite history. But anyway, it's there, and so I think, and then of course, you also have the way that the Vietnamese who left Vietnam, the exodus from Vietnam, the refugee exodus, what they have done in the world where they landed, right here in Orange County. And they are a big success in our country. They are a voice now to be heard in our country and in other countries. So once you look at all of that, you can't just say we suffered defeat. You have to include all of it, all of the things that happened. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that I would like to tell you, if we can go back a little bit to talk about what Foreign Service officers thought when we went to Vietnam. As I told you, we were, most of us, reluctant to go. We went because we were told to go. And we served our time there, and those tours were mostly short tours, only a year and a half, so we came back. But then near the end of 1972, the government, State Department, sent a lot of us back to Vietnam. And I guess they wanted to see, they wanted reporting on how the peace agreement was being implemented. So I guess they thought, well, we can't. That makes no sense to send new people. We have to send the people that we've already sent. But gosh, how are we going to do that? We've already asked them to go to Vietnam once. How are we going to ask them to go to Vietnam again? So they created this program, and it said if you go, you get 25% more than your salary. You only have to go for 6 months. You can take an R&R in the middle of your time there. Go anywhere in the world you want, but this is not a volunteer situation. If you're called, you have to go. So then they sent out these letters to me and to hundreds of other people. And what they found was everybody wanted to go back to Vietnam. They had no trouble in getting people to return to Vietnam. And I think the reasons are probably many, but I think maybe the strongest reason is that people who went to Vietnam the first time became converted to the cause of the South Vietnamese.
Was that the case for you?
Yes.
Okay. So you have a lot of doubt when you came in, but you have a lot of faith when you went out.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
In fact, I was in a way pleased to go back. I was not married then. I was pleased to go back because I thought I can make up for all the mistakes I made the first time.
You were
I'm
still
not
hopeful.
sure I did, but
So you were still hopeful that the whatever you did before, there's a continuation and it's going to grow in a good direction. Was
Yeah.
what you have in mind when you came back to.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
1972 you were talking about, right? 1972 you came back. 1972 you said.
no, I came back at the beginning of '73.
73.
Yeah.
Okay. Right after the Paris Agreement.
Right at the time that, in fact, I think it was January of '73.
Great.
Along with many other of my Foreign Service comrades.
Do you still think a lot about the time that you spent in Vietnam?
Sure, we all do. Yeah, we all think about Vietnam. And in fact, I've been back to Vietnam 4 times since the end of the war. 2 times on delegations looking at refugees.
Looking at refugee.
Well, looking into to be more specific, I worked for a while with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and we went to Vietnam on one occasion to look at the situation of the Montagnards, who were being very badly treated by the communist regime, the Hanoi regime, and who were escaping, often by walking across Cambodia to get to Thailand. So this was becoming, in itself, a problem that needed some attention. So we went to Vietnam, 4 or 5 of us, to talk to the authorities there and see what the situation was. That was one time. And then another time I went with a small group of Catholic bishops. They were really on a trip to meet with their counterparts in Vietnam, but I was along to look at refugees. So those were the 2 times that, and see what the situation with refugees was. So those were the 2 times that I was there in that guise. And then the other 2 times I went, I was just a tourist and went to different parts of the country.